This coaching staff needs to get the chains off Kirko on Monday Night Football.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another crossover Thursday. I am one of your humble hosts, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, joined by Gino Cammilleri of Locked On Eagles. And Crossover Thursday is, of course, presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So Gino and I humbly appreciate all of you that are everydayers of either one of our podcasts, whether that's a Locked On Falcons or Locked On Eagles podcaster. Those of you that make these podcasts your first listen or first watch each and every day. And if you want to become an everydayer so you don't miss another crossover Thursday, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And today, guys, because it is crossover Thursday, we are previewing the upcoming week 2 Monday night matchup between the Atlanta Falcons going on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's a big game. Primetime Kirk Cousins. That's not going to be a storyline at all this week. But Gino, before we jump into the conversation talking about some of the big stories surrounding the Atlanta Falcons as the away team, and later we'll get into some of those big stories for the Philadelphia Eagles as well as keys to victory. How you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm doing well. Football is in the air. It was a nice crisp morning when I woke up, had to throw the sweatshirt on, as you can see if you're watching here on YouTube, but things are going okay in Philadelphia. I mean, if you listen to the talking heads, they might seem a little bit rougher around the edges, but that's why you join us here for your local hosts at the Locked On Podcast Network on these crossover shows, so we can get a little more insight in here into Philly and Atlanta.
Yeah, so let's jump right in and get some insight into the Atlanta Falcons. If you're maybe a Philly Eagles fan, you've heard all the doom and gloom about Kirk Cousins and is he cooked? And that's seemingly the big story from all the big talking heads. But to me, the biggest story for the Atlanta Falcons that is quietly, or at least relatively quietly, gone under the radar from all the folks talking about is Kirk Cousins cooked? Can he move? Can he continue to be a starter in Atlanta? Is that the Falcons did not put together a competent game plan against the Pittsburgh Steelers, which kind of exacerbated all the issues that they were dealing with Kirk's limitations in terms of arm strength and mobility. And they were, expecting their supporting cast to kind of pick up the slack, and they necessarily did not do that, especially up front on the offensive line. And so to me, the big story headed into week 2 is, can this coaching staff put together a competent game plan that will at least allow the Atlanta Falcons to look decent against the Philadelphia Eagles, and to a point where we can get to a point where whether the Falcons win or lose the game, it's just like, hey, this is an actual NFL football team with an actual NFL game plan. And I know that sounds harsh to a lot of you Eagles fans and whatnot, but maybe it's not as harsh to the Eagles fans, because I'm sure that was a little bit of a question last year at the end of the season with some of the struggles that coaching staff was dealing with. It was basically, that was kind of the story of week 1. And so that to me is the big story heading into week 2 for this Falcons team. Can they put together a competent game plan that will actually feature their players in the best possible way? And it's tough, Gino, because for the last couple of years, that's all we've been talking about is Arthur Smith doesn't know how to utilize his players. And then we watch Arthur Smith be able to utilize Justin Fields and George Pickens, and then we watch the new Falcons coaching staff not necessarily be able to utilize all of their players. But that's kind of the big story in Atlanta this week.
So those not familiar with the Pittsburgh Steelers, let's say on our airwaves over at Locked On Eagles, was it a mismatch in terms of personnel, or did it strictly come down to the lack of the game plan for Atlanta? Because I look at Pittsburgh and I see their defensive line matching up in a very similar they don't have the TJ Watt. We know that, of course. That would be talking out of the other side of my mouth. But when it comes to the depth and the power that they have up front, was it the lack of guys that they had defending Kirk Cousins? Was it not getting the ball out of his hand quickly enough? Was it just that he's overall cooked right now?
Well, we'll find out if he's cooked, but I need to see the Falcons put together a real game plan, because they didn't have any play action in their offense. And again, that's a big talking point of they didn't have play action because Kirk is cooked at this point. I don't think that's the case. It really boils down to their game plan was we're just going to run the football against the Pittsburgh Steelers and really do nothing else. And so a lot of that was they didn't account for TJ Watt, right? They acted like they're the Philadelphia Eagles and there is no TJ Watt. And it was so baffling because you saw last year with the Rams, the coaching staff that Raheem Morris and new offensive coordinator Zach Robinson belonged to had a great game plan to neutralize TJ Watt. He had the least impactful game as a pass rusher last year, and basically all they did was chip him every single time. But for some reason, the Falcons seemingly got confused and thought Caleb McGarry was Lane Johnson, and you could just leave him on an island against TJ Watt, and they paid dearly for that. And so I don't think they came up with a winning formula. So yes, some of it was just, hey, the Steelers have butt kickers up front, and they kicked the butt of the Falcons offensive line. But I don't think the Falcons really had any, plan for that other than just we're just going to run the football and hope that's going to solve that problem, which it certainly didn't.
So when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, you lose to a team that doesn't score a touchdown. I know that's tough for the defense to walk away and look at the offense and say, hey, you couldn't have helped us out, but that's a pretty successful game for a team to not allow an offense to score any touchdowns at all. Was it a bend, don't break? They got to the red zone, were able to keep them out and let them settle for field goals, because last week for the Eagles, they went 50%, but there were some question marks. Jalen Hurts throws an interception in the red zone. Is that an area where maybe Atlanta, things might not be great between the 20s, but when they have their back to the fence, they might be able to stack up against the Eagles there?
Well, for the most part, Pittsburgh didn't really get into the red zone until late in the game. So it was a lot of Pittsburgh. The Falcons were able to stall the Steelers in between the 20s, and they were settling for long field goals in that game. So I think the big story for the defense this week is how good is this defense? Did they succeed last week against the Steelers because all the concerns surrounding the Steelers with the quarterback and the offensive line concerns, and Pittsburgh played a very conservative game plan, and did the Falcons benefit from an offense that really wasn't trying to go out there and score a ton of points, was just basically, yes, we want to win an 18-10 game. That's plays to the Steelers' strengths, versus a team like Philadelphia, who's going to basically say, we have the firepower that we can put up 30 points every single week. And so to me, the big story is this Falcons defense for real? And so can they slow down an offense the caliber of the Eagles team? Can they get the stops in the red zone? Can they create the turnovers that you saw Green Bay able to do last week in that season opener? And, it's going to be a challenge for them, just because I think from a pure talent standpoint, and I'm not saying anything Eagles fans don't already know, at every position group on the Eagles offense, you would compare that to the Steelers offense. The Eagles are significantly better at every single spot: quarterback, O-line, running back, wide receiver, tight end, etc. And so that to me is really the question for the Falcons. Can they match up with a team that has the talent level that a team like the Philadelphia Eagles has? And that to me is going to be the big story for the Falcons defense. But we know there are some big stories for the Eagles on the flip side of things, including whether or not Jalen Hurts is going to turn the ball over, and we'll get Gino to break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, Locked On Eagles crossover Thursday. Guys, today's show is sponsored by our good friends at DoorDash, and I'm going to take you behind the curtain here for a Locked On podcast. A lot of times we're sitting here trying to prep our shows and coordinate our schedules, and you look at your phone or you look at your watch and you realize, man, time has flied and I haven't really gotten a bite to eat. And you're sitting there wondering, hey, man, do I have enough time before I record my next podcast, whether or not I can run out and grab a bite to eat? But I don't have to worry about that with DoorDash. And whether you're like me looking for a meal on the go, or you're just looking to load up on game day with some of your favorite foods, snacks, and drinks, DoorDash is the place to go. You can do so without missing a play on game day. And when you head on over to DoorDash, make sure you use the promo code LOCKEDFALL24, and you'll get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Limited time offer, terms apply. Promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to order your game day favorites. Must be 21 or over to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select market. And guys, I also want to tell you about Hims. And today I am a proud member of the Bald Brotherhood, but I wasn't always that way. And when it comes to hair loss, you got to catch it early, right? And I realized I was losing my hair in my mid-20s. And unfortunately for me, there was not a product like Hims out there back back then. And Hims is providing access to a range of hair loss treatments that work all from the comfort of your couch. The process is simple and 100% online. Answer a few questions, and a medical provider will determine if treatment is right for you. And if prescribed, your treatment will be sent directly to your door. Treatment includes clinically proven ingredients that can regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedonnfl. That's HIMS.com/lockedonnfl for your personalized hair treatment options. hims.com/lockedonnfl. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if the prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. So we're back here. Myself, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, Gino Cammilleri of Locked On Eagles, talking crossover Thursday. And we're going to get into the breakdown of this Philadelphia Eagles team and the biggest stories for them heading into this Monday night matchup in week 2. But before we get and talk a little bit about Jalen Hurts and whether or not he's going to be able to protect the football for this Eagles team on Monday Night Football, I want to tell you that to get geared up for the rest of this weekend's action, make sure you check out Locked On NFL, the new version of Locked On NFL, where you get 2 shows daily, that shot of espresso from Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans to give you what's going on in the NFL, and head on over to the barbershop for Locked On Jaguars, Tony Wiggins, to get that real NFL talk. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, Gino, as we're talking about the Eagles now and what's going on with them, a big part of it seems to be Jalen Hurts having some uncharacteristic, is that fair to say, turnovers last week. And, fortunately, the Eagles were able to survive that and get the win. But how big as a concern is that moving forward for this team?
Offensive coordinator Kellen Moore spoke yesterday on Wednesday to the media, and he said that those turnovers for Jalen Hurts, those have to be learning moments, areas where he can look at the film and say, I can't do this again, essentially. And you said uncharacteristic, but if you look at the last calendar year or so, that's been one of the things that has really been a thorn in the side of this Eagles team. And the tough part about that is, if you want the Hulk, sometimes you're going to have to live with the bad of it. Sometimes you're going to have to live with the destructive element of it, because the Bruce Banner side to Jalen Hurts, when he's able to sit in there, play professor, and pick apart teams from the pocket, that's where he's really good. And you're probably saying, what, Jalen Hurts, the scrambling quarterback? But if you look at his drop back EPA numbers, he ranked in the top 5 among all quarterbacks in football in week 1. But the area that kills his effectiveness is shooting his team in the foot and turning the ball over. Now, if you look at the second turnover as opposed to the first, the second one, for Falcons fans who may not have seen that game, but if you didn't watch it, it was a gem of a football game last Friday night. Jalen Hurts decided to roll out to his right, and on a field where his players couldn't find their footing, he decided to throw back across his body to an A.J. Brown, who then slipped, and Jair Alexander was able to keep his eyes to the quarterback and make a play on the football. Now, why that's alarming to me is that, 1, a 4th-year starter can't make that play. And 2, you're going into a game against Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons, who, if you talk about what they really excel at, it's keeping their eyes to the football and making plays on the ball. Those are 2 guys that we have talked about at Locked On Eagles ad nauseum when it came to acquiring safeties for that exact reason. And Jalen Hurts, if he puts the ball in that position, Xavier McKinney made him pay last week. Jair Alexander made him pay last week. But at the end of the day, they still won the football game because of this guy, because of what he did for 3/4 of the game. It is a concern, but if the floor is 34 points for a team and a game where Jalen Hurts turns the ball over 3 times and they lose the turnover differential, it definitely is a concern, but one of those things that you have to live with the positive output of Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a testament to all the other good things that are going on in Philadelphia. And certainly, as you mentioned, the majority of that game, Jalen Hurts played some really good football. And using the term uncharacteristic, it just seemed not necessarily because, hey, he doesn't turn the ball over, but just those decisions that I think you're touching upon. It just seemed like, Jalen, why are you doing this? You don't need to do this in this moment. And you're right. This is what the Falcons are hoping to feast on, that they can be able to take more advantage of this with players like Jesse Bates with Justin Simmons, who, Jesse Bates especially will love to cheat. He will basically go completely off structure of what the defense is called and catch you off guard. So you'll sit here and be like, oh, they're in too high coverages. And all of a sudden, Jesse Bates is 15 yards away from where he's supposed to be, picking off a pass and taking it the distance. So that is something that the Falcons are hoping to prey upon in this game. And we'll see if Jalen Hurts does learn from that in terms of being able to protect the ball a little bit better. But talking about this Eagles defense, right? The story of the Eagles these last, seemingly decade is, they have a great pass rush. And the last couple of years, it hasn't been quite to the level that Philadelphia wanted it to be. And there was a lot of shuffling this offseason. The whole Hassan Reddick saga still going on in New York, but they swapped him out for Bryce Huff. And surprisingly, we're not seeing Bryce Huff. And is he the solution to the Eagles' pass rush problems, getting him more action, or are other guys going to have to step up?
Well, defensive coordinator Vic Fangio said pretty black and white yesterday in his press conference that Bryce Huff has to earn his reps if he wants to get more snaps. And this is one of those things that football is difficult because there almost is this checks and balances like system where if your personnel staff is in love with this guy and they see a fit for him, but the coaching staff gets him into the building and he can't do some of the things that he wants to do because of this player, I don't know if Bryce Huff is going to be the Hassan Reddick for this team, but he's one player that coming into this game, eyes, spotlight, it's all going to be on him. And not just him, but the edge rushers in general. If you look at where most of the pressure came on the quarterback, being Jordan Love last week, it was on the interior. Jalen Carter was able to cause some chaos. Jordan Davis had a pretty good game. Depth players like Milton Williams and Moro Ijeoma were able to affect the pocket. But the names you didn't hear, Brandon Graham, Nolan Smith, Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, the big money guys. That's where the investment lies on the defensive side of the ball. On the interior, they're not paying anybody. They haven't given an extension to any of these guys. They're all on rookie contracts. They just paid Bryce Huff $18 million. Josh Sweat is still waiting to get a contract extension, which he figured he was going to get when Hassan Reddick was sent out of the building. But I think right now, they're kind of at a crossroads. You set it up perfectly, Aaron. Like this, the last couple of years isn't their standard. 2022 was the standard. Yeah, it was 85 Bears type of numbers, but when you look at it situationally, the edge rushers had to step up when it mattered, and they weren't able to do that the last 10, 11 games or so. And if it wasn't for Jalen Carter and that interior pressure last week, Jordan Love probably has a chance to drive that team down the football game and win that game. So if the edge rushers can't get home, and let's say the Falcons put together a better game plan where if you look at the tape of Kirk Cousins against the Eagles, play action them to death. That's been what he has done well for them. Let's say they put together that game plan and the guys up front can't hit home. You're putting a lot of stress on your secondary, which already was tested a lot last week. Did good with Darius Slay, did good with Quinyon Mitchell, but do they have the depth to defend a Darnell Mooney or let's say, why can't I think of it? The three named Ray McLeod. Yeah, me and Lou literally were talking about him 25 minutes ago, and I just forgot his name. But yeah, Ray McLeod had a good game against his former team in Pittsburgh. If they don't have that pass rush, that middle of the field is going to be affected greatly for the Eagles.
Yeah. When you look at this Eagles team, their identity has always seemingly been great up front, questionable in the middle with that linebacker core, and then enough in the secondary to make it all work together. And so if they're not great up front, that sort of identity kind of falls a little bit apart. And we'll see if the Falcons can hold their own against this Eagles pass rush. I don't love the matchup on the interior, but certainly if that's all you're worried about, you don't have to worry about the edge rush like the Falcons had to last week with Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt. And certainly on paper, you look at this Eagles pass rush and Bryce Huff. I remember him playing against the Jets last year when the Falcons went up to New York. He terrorized them in that week. And so if Vic Fangio is not a fan of Bryce Huff, I'm a big fan of Vic Fangio because I don't want to see any part of Bryce Huff this week based off of what he did last year. But I think if you're an Eagles fan, you're looking at the film of last week where TJ Watt was just terrorizing Caleb McGarry. and Nick Herbig and Alex Highsmith were getting after it with Jake Matthews, and you're hoping, hey, maybe this is the adrenaline shot in the arm that our pass rush needs to get home, especially when you don't have to worry about Jordan Love stepping up in the pocket with Kirk Cousins this week. So that pass rush really is kind of set up for success. So if they can't feast this week, I think could become a lot more concerned about what things are going to look like later this year.
Without a doubt. And Lou and I said that on yesterday's show as well, that you're going into an environment which primetime Kirk Cousins. It's just one of those things, whether it's Washington or Minnesota or Atlanta, you have been on the right side of things against him. And the one thing that you couldn't measure is that Nick Foles is going to get inducted into the Eagles Hall of Fame that night. So strap a little more adrenaline into that building. If the pass rush can't get going, there's going to be some serious questions and calls on that Eagles radio come that next Tuesday morning, because that's where the money lies, man. If your big free agent is an $18 million pass rush after a game where said team's pass rushers feasted and you can't do so, that's where questions start to arise, as you said, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see, how the Eagles answer those questions, and we'll wrap up today's Crossover Thursday talking about keys to victory. What are 3 things each of the Atlanta Falcons and Philadelphia Eagles have to do in order to win this game? And we'll break that down to wrap up today's Crossover Thursday. So, guys, I want to tell you about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because they have something a little different for you today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with that YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. And all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. And when you head on over to FanDuel.com, go check out the line for this upcoming Eagles-Falcons matchup. The Eagles are currently favored by 6.5 points. Do you feel like the Falcons are going to have a rebound week after a struggling week 1? Or do you feel like the Eagles are going to take advantage of a struggling Falcons team and just roll and blow them out? So go check it out at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. So wrapping up today's Crossover Thursday, I'm Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, joined by Gino Cammilleri of Locked On Eagles, and Crossover Thursday is, of course, presented by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So, Gino, let's get into the things that these teams need to do in order to win, and also called keys to victory. And so for me, the big 3 for the Atlanta Falcons are, hey, coaches, do your job, and come up with a good game plan. And 2, don't get owned in the trenches by this Eagles pass rush that wants to have a resurgent game. And then number 3, win that turnover battle. And unlike the Green Bay Packers, turn those into touchdowns. And so talking about that number 1 thing, coaches' jobs to put players in a position to succeed. They did not do that in week 1. I could sit here and spend hours and speculate on all the different ways that I would personally, if I was the coach of the Atlanta Falcons, put those guys in ways to succeed that are different than what the Falcons did in week 1. But, while Locked On pays me very well, I don't make quite as much as the Falcons coaching staff does. And so they get paid the big bucks. So they need to come up with better strategies than what somebody like me can come up with on a podcast. But just one suggestion that I'll offer for them for free: bring back a little bit more misdirection in the offense, right? If that's not going to necessarily be play action like it wasn't last week, then you got to compensate with maybe a lot more motion in the offense. NFL players are just too good to just simply line up and just try to beat you. The only team in the state of Georgia that can do that is the University of Georgia, because they play at a much lower level of competition. And frankly, if you try to do that against the Eagles, they're just better than you, and they'll be able to outdo you in that regard. And then that leads us to number 2. You got to keep Kirk clean in the pocket. I'm looking for this offensive line, especially on the interior, to see how they match up with Jalen Carter. He scares me from the University of Georgia. I just feel like he's going to wreak havoc all over this game. And again, I hope Vic Fangio, continues to basically have a bug up his butt about playing Bryce Huff. And that's just one less issue that the Falcons have to deal with. But if they do have to deal with Bryce Huff or any of these edge rushers, you pay Charlie Warner to be one of the 5 highest paid blocking tight ends. So ask him to do that job and block. and let Kyle Pitts go out there and be the playmaker in the passing game rather than having him stuck in there at the chip and whatnot to help out these tackles. And then that third one is we saw the Falcons. A big reason why they lost that week 1 game was because they were -3 in the turnover margin. Eagles were -2, but they still managed to win. I think some of that was owed to the fact that on those 3 turnovers, Green Bay was only to convert those into field goals. And so the Falcons need to be +2, +3 in terms of turnovers this week and turn those into touchdowns. And we'll see if they can do that. But now that I've outlined the 3 keys to victory for the Atlanta Falcons, what do you got for the Philadelphia Eagles?
Number 1, I'm going to go off of your number 3. I think it's win the turnover battle. And it's 2 teams that come off of games where they lost the turnover battle. It definitely was a point of emphasis in the film room this week. You'd think the coaches were harping on them for ball security. This is going to be 2 teams that put an emphasis on that going into this game. And for the Philadelphia Eagles, it starts with the leadership of your quarterback in that position. If Jalen can turn the ball over, why can't I turn the ball over? Why do I have to be perfect? Well, Jalen has to set that regard. Win the turnover battle. You can't have 2 turnovers on the first 2 drives of a football game. That's only happened once in the last decade, and that was in 2014 against the Jaguars on opening day. So let that sit in the past and let that be another decade before it happens. Number 2, and the most important thing for number 2, Nick Sirianni, get your team dialed in from the get-go. You're a CEO head coach. You're not calling plays. You're not the defensive coordinator. The reason you came out sloppy was because of the preparation Monday through Saturday. You were not ready to come out there and win that football game in that first half. And it starts with the head coach. And we put a lot of pressure on that guy. But when you can't go down the play call sheet and say, why did you call this play? Why did you call this play? In those areas, when you're in the red zone, when you're in for a minute, when you're starting the football game, you have to be dialed in when it comes to getting the snap off on time, not taking delay of games, not having 12 guys in the huddle. Nick Sirianni, get things going. And number 3, attack primetime Kirk Cousins like you've attacked primetime Kirk Cousins. There's a formula to it, and I was talking to Lou on our show yesterday that he'll be able to keep it close, but then when 1 or 2 things goes awry and you get into that second half when he starts to chase points, much like Jalen Hurts has his Hulk moments, that's when all things go awry for Kirk Cousins and the chaos meter can really start to unfold. I think the Eagles have to make it difficult for him. If he gets the ball out quickly, they have the guys on the island now that can play more press in Quinyon Mitchell and Darius Slay, but it starts with affecting Kirk Cousins up front. Number 1, win the turnover battle. Number 2, Nick Sirianni. You got to have this team dialed in. And number 3, attack primetime Kirk Cousins all night long. And I want to throw an asterisk in there because this is almost like an S tier. If you're in that off or defensive game planning room right now and you're Vic Fangio and you're not looking at Bijan Robinson and pointing and circling this guy and saying, hey, do not let him ruin the game for us, there's something going wrong because he is the one guy that if you look at, he could change the game in the blink of an eye. And Josh Jacobs in that second half for Green Bay, he started to get going. So if you let a player like that, who the more he gets punched in the mouth, the more he wants to come back and run the football with a little bit more intensity in the pass game, in the run game, you have to take away Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, it's going to be a great matchup between Bijan and Saquon. All eyes are going to be glued on probably the 2 most dynamic, explosive runners in the NFL. And we'll see sort of who shines. Probably both of them will shine at various points. But I do love the potential given the historic weaknesses of the Eagles at that linebacker position. Let's do what so many other teams have done successfully and exploit that and get some one-on-ones with Bijan in the open field with some of those guys and see how they handle that situation. But that is it for us guys here on this crossover Thursday. Make sure you continue to check out Gino and Louie over at Locked On Eagles to get you guys geared up for this Monday night matchup. And of course, I'll be covering it from the Falcons angle here on Locked On Falcons. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you check out Locked On NFL for that second listen to get you geared up for what's going on with the other 30 NFL teams this weekend. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.